Hi everyone, it's been a 007 here. Happy New Year. Welcome to Vassals of Kingsgrave's Agatha Christie linear reread, which is in the fifth from final episode. We're nearly there, boys and girls. This is episode 62, and today we're covering the Miss Marple murder mystery Nemesis, originally published in November 71. We ummed and ahed about whether this should be a full episode. It's the last Miss Marple she wrote, so it's not without its flaws, but there's some interesting stuff in it. And with me to discuss all that is Pat.
Are there 2.0 in the Discord?
Good to have you with us. So, this novel comes after Passenger to Frankfurt, an extravaganza, absolute bonkers novel that came out in 1970. It's followed by Elephants Can Remember, Nov 72. Agatha Christie's in her early 80s at this point. It is remarkable she's still writing.
Yeah, she's a real stalwart of the 20th century. So
Yeah, absolutely. Which is part of why I wanted to do this reread.
Mm.
It's the last Miss Marple she wrote, but there is another one, Sleeping Murder, that is the last one to be published. She wrote that one. Well, it's a little bit contested, but probably during World War II with subsequent revisions. It's dedicated to someone called Daphne Honeybone, which I just thought was a really lovely name. It sounds like a James Bond secretary.
yes,
It's by Honeybone, but slightly saucy, like a little bit naughty.
yeah, yeah, early James Bond, 60s and 70s James
Yeah,
Bond.
exactly.
Yeah,
The best and the rudest of the James Bonds.
yeah.
Um, so as always, we're going to be spoiler free to the end credits music, and then we'll get into clues and solutions. Lots of Christieverse stuff in here, not least because, of course, A Caribbean Mystery is where Miss Marple first meets Jason Rafiel, the cantankerous but super rich financier. She is going to be sent on a mission by him posthumously. But there's also some similarities. There's a callback to Bertram's Hotel. And there's a bit of similarity also to the Tommy and Tuppence novel By the Pricking of Our Thumbs, where Tuppence was investigating a mystery by looking at tombstones in a church. So we're going to see some of that again. So the setup of the novel is Miss Marple first encounters Jason Rafiel in A Caribbean Mystery, where they solve a murder together. She receives a letter. They haven't really kept in touch, although she has a fondness for him. She receives a letter from a firm of solicitors after he's died, saying that he wants her to look into a incredibly vaguely specified crime, or unspecified really. And if she succeeds in solving it, she's going to get 20 grand after a year, which apparently is like 200 grand in today's money. So no mean amount of money.
Yeah, not to be sniffed at.
Yeah, and it seems incredibly vague, but then she is sent on a tour of some famous British houses, like a coach tour with 15 other people, and she starts meeting people who are going to lead her into the investigation. So I think like it's a very cool setup. The coach tour, I think, is very of its time and of its social milieu. Had you read this one before, Pat? What did you make of it? Where would this rank in top tier, mid tier, bottom tier, Christie, for you?
I hadn't read this before, and I think this might be the first Marple that I've actually done a pod with you on. I've
Ah,
read quite a few of the Marples in the past, in preparation, and then for some reason or whatever, not managed to get on it. I'm not a big fan of Marple. I much
yeah, me
prefer
neither.
Poirot, but I
Mm.
do think this one, although it's got its problems, I do think it's got a couple of strengths are worth praising Christie for, which we'll get into in the spoiler section.
So would you put it like mid tier?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it is mid tier, and I think I will be overly generous in putting it mid tier. I think the All About Agatha podcast, they're a bit more severe on it, and
Mm.
for understandable reasons. But I do think the reveal scene at the end
Yes.
is incredible, and I think that little novella there
Mm.
is fabulous reading, and
Yeah.
I do think I would give it extra brownie points for that. When I was a kid in school once, I wrote like this terrible essay, but the teacher gave me like a B for it because of the final paragraph, which she thought was brilliant. And I think this is very similar. I think,
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
you're right.
Christie's
Um,
rescued it with a brilliant reveal scene at the end. So
yeah, there's a lot of bagginess, as with all of these like dictaphone novels,
yeah,
and a
no,
bit of
the build up
repetitiveness, and
the
it
build up
takes
is
a while.
interminable as well. It takes so
Yeah.
long to actually
It,
hit its stride.
There's 40 or 50 pages too much in this novel, but I think the
Yeah.
conclusion is amazing. And I think the psychology of it is
Mm,
very plausible, scarily plausible, actually.
yeah.
And just shows her, like, sometimes people think or criticize her as being all plot and no character, like, oh, the characters, same characters just get trotted out. And I think actually she's much better at understanding human psychology
Yeah.
than people
This
give
one
her
is the
credit for.
opposite, I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah,
So
exactly. So, okay, we're in the 70s or the early 70s. One of the few novels that was genuinely written in this period. Lots of social change, as we've had in all of these 70s and 80s novels. Sorry, 60s and 70s novels. The first one, and I point this out just because I've started, this makes me sound like such a fogey. I've started taking a daily newspaper, like an actual newspaper once again. And I get newspapers delivered on a Saturday and Sunday, and I find it very civilized to read a proper paper with a cup of coffee because I'd missed it. And so there is a lot of bemoaning of the decline and fall of the daily newspaper. There's a brilliant, I'm going to read it because it's quite a long form quote, but you just sort of feel Agatha Christie was venting into her dictaphone.
yes.
um, so here we go. A few other items in the daily paper that she had nicknamed the Daily All Sorts. This being a slightly satirical allusion to the fact that her paper, the Daily Newspaper Giver, owing to a change of proprietor to her own and to other of her friends' great annoyance, now provided articles on men's tailoring, women's dress, female heartthrobs, competitions for children, and complaining letters from women, and had managed pretty well to shove any real news off any part of it but the front page, or to some obscure corner where it was impossible to find it. Miss Marple, being old fashioned, preferred her newspapers to be newspapers and give you news. And it just kind of like made me feel very seen and heard. And I thought in 2025, I think newspapers have gone into decline, but she was saying this in 1971. So there you
Yeah,
go.
I've got to admit, I felt a little bit guilty reading that because I've given up newspapers, but when I
Mm,
was doing newspapers, my pleasure were the Saturday and Sunday papers, and I probably spent much more time on the sections that she's, dreading and bemoaning. The women's fashion section, the men's tailoring, the food. What bottle of wine you should be buying that week from the Super Plonk column, or
yeah,
all the
exactly.
various.
Because that's what weekend papers are for, right? They're for the supplements.
Exactly,
But
but that, like, she's characterized the actual rise of that, because before then they were just newspapers, weren't they? You didn't have,
yeah,
because back then you bought like Woman's World or whatever the boys magazine was, or like they but they've grown so much, these weekend papers now. They are almost like lifestyle,
yeah, and probably with
and
like cheaper printing and not sort of computer
yeah,
layout rather than typesetting. It is funny that she anonymizes the other papers she's satirizing.
yeah,
So she goes off on one about the Times. So she
yeah,
obviously was particularly peeved about the change. So she has not that the Times was what it used to be. The maddening thing about the Times was that you couldn't find anything anymore. Instead of going through from the front page and knowing where everything else was so that you passed easily to any special articles on subjects in which you were interested, there were now extraordinary interruptions to this devoted to travel in Capri with illustrations. Sport appeared with far more prominence than it ever had in the old days. Court
yeah.
news, I mean, that's so old fashioned. Court news and obituaries were a little more faithful to routine. It's just so funny because it goes on and on. And it's like, I
Yeah.
think it's about like 3 pages in my
Yeah,
version.
there's pages and pages of this. I suppose that this is quite interesting in a way, because one of the reasons that you're doing this is because Agatha Christie has catalogued the 20th
Mm,
century. These books are a historical document. And this is an element that we've lost now. This is something that's it's not completely vanished, but it would have been far more prevalent. People going through the papers and stuff like that. I mean, certainly amongst my circle of friends, whereas 20 years ago we all would have got a raft of Saturday and Sunday papers and maybe one daily throughout the week. Like, there's maybe like 1 in 5 of us does it now.
yeah, I
Just
mean,
because
no
life's
one
changed.
even, and I'm old, no one does it of my friends. I mean, my husband's got a sort of sub to The Guardian online, but and he just scrolls through stuff on his phone. The concept of
Yeah.
even sitting at a desktop to actually properly go through the paper, I mean, it just doesn't exist anymore, does it?
No.
Ehu, oh me miserum. Here's another thing that's gone to ruin. Country houses, like Styles, St. Mary, where we started off our Agatha Christie journey, and where in Curtin we will return. So she's done a lot about the decline of the country house, but it feels very nostalgic here and almost like she's talking to a dictaphone about her childhood days and just reminiscing sweetly rather than getting on with the story. I feel very much like we're stuck in the Shire in Fellowship of the Ring here. Here's the
But,
quote. I was here as a
but
girl. I was the housemaid then. The 3 servants they had, a cook, a housemaid, a parlour maid, kitchen maid too at one time. That was in the old colonel's time. Horses he kept too, and a groom. Ah, those were the days. Sad it is when things happen the way they do. End quote. But it does go on and on and on. But I just really thought it's very rare for Agatha Christie normally to say those were the days. Normally she acknowledges change, but she's like, no, the march of time has to move on and we have to go
Mm,
with it. But
yeah,
this is a novel that felt very nostalgic to me, especially in
yeah.
these early passengers.
Yeah, well, she is writing this, as you said. She's like in her early 80s. She's got a tremendous amount of history to look back on,
Mm,
and she has catalogued, the decline of the country gentle person's house over the 20th century, hasn't she? I mean,
yeah.
you see it in programs like Downton Abbey, how it's changed. And like I thought you touched on this at the start as well when you were talking about these coach tours. Like
Mm,
again, that this is like an element of society that it's not vanished, but it's changed. And maybe 10 years before Agatha wrote this book, or 15 years before Agatha wrote this book, it wouldn't have been as prevalent, wouldn't have been as big a thing, and
mm.
certainly when Agatha started writing, it wouldn't have existed. People, of course, would have visited country houses the way Elizabeth Bennet does when
Yes.
she's up in
Yeah.
Derbyshire, but they would have been as invited guests, not as paying tourists.
Or
You know,
individual families, right? Not as a coach tour. And
yeah,
yeah, like, we're talking about horses and grooms. We've now gone from the aristocrat with the odd car to sort of commercial automobile tours. I mean, the
yeah,
commodification of the car is complete here. So my final 2 points were all about sort of the modern girl and education of the modern girl. This is Professor Wanstead, who's a character on young women.
yeah. I'm not. Yes, and this is why the All About Agatha podcast marked it down so severely, and you know, possibly deservedly. But anyway, let's get on with Professor Wanstead.
It just made me laugh there. I thought it was very funny. Girls and
Right.
their families. A headmistress must have knowledge of many things. Romances, for instance, that girls might indulge in, are known to their parents. It happens, It happens very often, especially in the last 10 or 20 years. Girls are said to mature earlier. That is physically true, though in a deeper sense of the word, they mature late. They remain childish longer, childish in the clothes they like to wear, childish with their floating hair. Even their miniskirts represent a worship of childishness. Their baby doll nightdresses, their gym slips and shorts, all children's fashions. They wish not to become adult, not to have to accept our kind of responsibility. And yet, like all children, they want to be thought grown up and free to do what they think are grown up things. And that leads sometimes to tragedy and sometimes to the aftermath of tragedy. I mean, it's right, isn't it? I mean, it must have been very noticeable in the post war decades when rationing ended and nutrition improved that girls and boys would have been maturing more rapidly and to greater heights and measurements.
Possibly, but I'd like to make a sweeping generalization like that based on gender.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, and I feel now like this is one area where this book, if you were going to do a modern adaptation of this, I think this book would have to change because
Mm,
whereas I think Agatha, to her detriment, has written Professor Wanstead as a serious character, I think now he could only ever be played as a caricature because
mm.
he is just such a pompous buffoon, really, when
So,
you're
but do
listening
you
to him
think Agatha Christie
talk.
thinks what Professor Wanstead thinks, or do you think she is satirizing him a little bit?
I think because of the position that he's given, I don't think she's satirizing him. I'd like to give her the benefit of the doubt, but like the company he keeps, the
Yeah.
position in society that he has, the respect that he
His role
gets.
in
I
the
mean,
story. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
this
I
guy
agree.
knocks around with prison governors and the Home Secretary, So, and I think at the time that Agatha was writing, well, we might, after Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, we might scoff at these people and we might like see them as potential comic characters or caricatures that should have fun poked at them. I don't think so in this case. I think if I was going to be really generous to Agatha here, I'd say that what she's doing is she's using Professor Wanstead as a cipher to express what society's opinions at the times were.
Mm.
This was probably a common conversation she had with many people, and she's just put it down on the page. I don't know if she genuinely believes it, but I don't think like in previous books, she sometimes does make quite savage social commentary, on characters, and you can read it into the text. It seems quite obvious, particularly if Poirot's observing them, and you get that in a monologue. We don't get anything like that here, I don't think.
I agree with you. I think sometimes we do debate, don't we, and with Hannah as well, whether she's the one with the aggressive comments or it's just a character. But here it's said with no real ironic editorializing. So I think it probably is a reflection of what people like that thought at the time, and she probably quite agreed with it.
Yeah.
And I think it's backed up by the final excerpt I want to read, where she talks about modern girls' schools, because there's a headmistress of apparently a very famous girls' school called Fallowfield. I thought the headmistress had resigned some time ago, 6 months at least. I'm sure I read about it in the paper. That is to say, there was a bit about the new headmistress. Married woman. So married woman already unusual, right? Because normally they were spinsters. Youngish, 35 to 40, modern ideas. Give the girls lessons in cosmetics. Let them wear trouser suits, something of that kind. And again, normally I would have said, "Oh, Agatha's poking fun at some old fogey," but I think she probably feels the same. Like, why are girls wandering around in trouser suits?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd put it as strongly as like Agatha is strongly feeling this, but like I definitely feel she is giving us the social norm of the period, and she's not challenging it as she has done at times.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
it's possibly like that's a reflection of her age when she's writing. She's
She's early 80s. My goodness. I mean,
she's seen quite a bit, hasn't she? And she can't fight every battle. So
I don't think anything shocks her, put it that way. So let's get in. Any other things you wanted to point out before we get into this
the only other
candidate?
thing, like on the last pod, you talked about the taxation, and
Yes.
again, there is continual
Moaning.
rumbling about taxes. And at this, we are still in this period of super high taxation for high earners in Britain, where like I think you mentioned the Beatles taxman song being written.
Yeah.
About the tax levels at the time, and like this is it. We're still in that period, aren't we? It's still got a couple more years where if you're earning a decent wage, you're probably paying something like 95% tax. So
top trash, yeah, or going to Switzerland like Roger Moore and many others moving tax residents, which to Agatha's credit, she never did. Interestingly, yeah, she paid. She moaned about it, but she did pay it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through some of the events between Passage into Frankfurt and the publication of this book. So, October 1970, Pope Paul VI named St. Catherine of Siena as the second female doctor of the church. Significant because she is my saint's name. So, my middle name is Caterina Benincasa after Catherine of Siena. So, not relevant for anyone else, but kind of interesting for me. October 70, Jochen Rindt becomes Formula One World Driving Champion. The first to earn the honour, very sadly, posthumously. Also, American rock singer Janis Joplin is found dead of an overdose, age 27, in her hotel room in Hollywood. So sad. Kind of the end of the hippie 60s, isn't it? When it all just starts going very sour. December 1970, the US Environmental Protection Agency is established. May well be abolished soon. Who's to say? January 1971. The first ever one-day international cricket match is played between Australia and England at the MCG.
Let's add England lost that one as well.
Oh, Christ. I mean, yeah, then as now.
Yeah, starts me to go on.
Exactly. In Uganda, Idi Amin deposes Milton Obote in a coup and becomes president. Actually, that's going to be significant for my family because we have family members who were kicked out of Uganda on the back of Idi Amin taking power. In Los Angeles, Charles Manson and three female family members are found guilty of the 1969 Tate LaBianca murders. So very iconic moment in, I guess, crime history. February 1971, Switzerland gives women voting rights in state elections, but not in all canton-specific ones.
No, I saw that as well. I was like, yeah, go the Swiss. You're finally getting around to giving women the voting franchise.
Kind of.
Sort of.
We also get the decimalisation of currency in the UK and Ireland. So there we go. We get the bankruptcy of Rolls-Royce and its nationalisation. And we also get, this surprised me how early this was, the founding of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange in New York.
Yes.
I also thought that was a tech thing that happened in like the late 90s with pets.com or something.
Yeah, Incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't believe I didn't know that. I mean, that's like meant to be stuff I know about. March 1971, a bomb explodes in the men's room at the United States Capitol. The Weather Underground claims responsibility. So I think we talked in the last episode, Passenger to Frankfurt, about things like the Bader-Meinhof gang in Germany. This is a moment where that hippie flower power revolution turns militant, and it's happening kind of across the world actually, with young people
Mm,
taking active measures and terrorist, what we would maybe now see as domestic terrorism measures, but very earnestly intended, I think, and with casualties. We also get the fight of the century with boxer Joe Frazier defeating Muhammad Ali in a
mm.
15-round unanimous decision at Madison Square Garden. One of, I guess, the most iconic matches of all time, right?
Yeah, it's phenomenal. If you go back and watch like documentaries on the boxing in the 70s, like there were a handful of fights
Mm.
that involved Ali, and with people like George Foreman and Joe Frazier.
Rumble in the jungle and all that. Yeah.
My dad still swears blind that the best boxing match he ever saw was that one, the Joe Frazier Muhammad Ali one.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't be
So,
alone, right? I mean, that's a comment. That's a,
oh yeah,
yeah, yeah.
huge, huge. I mean,
Huge.
it does nothing for me boxing, but it's hard not to recognise, those two guys going at it. I mean, 15 rounds as well,
Yeah,
brutal.
flipping heck.
So
Especially now, and like we know what happened to Muhammad Ali, and we know so much more about
mm,
concussion. I don't stand
yeah,
down on boxing though. I used to love boxing as a kid. Weirdly, but some of those matches, you look at them now, and you look at the people and what became of them, and think,
yeah.
sorry.
I was going to say they were just such monumental athletes as well.
Mm.
It is tragic. But yes, anyway, let's carry on. On a lighter note.
On a lighter note, I was also surprised to discover that not only was Nasdaq founded in this year, but so was Starbucks. First ever Starbucks
Yes.
coffee shop. I view that as an
Yeah.
incredibly modern phenomenon, and paper cups and everything. But no,
Yeah, but again, the end of the hippie age and the beginning, of the multi-franchise, global franchises. So Starbucks has founded coffee shop all over the world.
I am a victim of Starbucks commodification of sweetened dairy. I was very upset today to learn that the eggnog latte no longer exists because Christmas is over. And I had my first ever pistachio nut latte, and it was delightful. So it's not even remotely coffee adjacent, but yeah, for fans
There
of
you go.
sweetened dairy with artificial flavoring, I can highly recommend. Okay, so into April of that year, we have the Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education case at the Supreme Court of the United States, ruling unanimously that busing of students may be ordered to achieve racial desegregation. Famously, one of the little girls on that bus was Kamala Harris. So, very monumental decision.
Mm.
And we have the first ever broadcast of National Public Radio, NPR, in the States. I listen to a lot of NPR podcasts. I was surprised it was this late. I mean, you think the BBC's been going like since whenever, 20s, 30s?
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
surprised me that only in the 70s. The other thing that
quite right.
surprised, yeah, this is like a surprising one of like earlys and lates. It also surprised me that Amtrak only had its first intercity rail passenger service in May 71. I mean, come on, America, embrace the train.
Yeah, again, like but you watch so many films of what you think is that period, but maybe 5, 10 years later, and it is such a universal like
Mm.
sort of phrase. Like I was amazed because I always thought Amtrak was like nailed on, as part of America's long-standing culture. But I suppose that's a reflection on our age,
And
because
maybe
we've
it
gone,
is, but it's just they didn't have the big like intercity. I mean, it's a big country, isn't it? So maybe
yeah,
intercities took a while.
yeah.
The next one really amuses me. This is May 71. You've got, basically since the 20s, major world currencies have been on the gold standard. So basically fixed exchange rates. The US having to finance Vietnam and other things going on decides to just come off the gold standard. US dollar floods European currency markets, threatens the Deutsche Mark. Central banks in Europe stop currency trading. I mean, like at some point, Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, Switzerland aren't trading currency. And I remember very much when I was studying economics and being played the Nixon tapes, the Watergate tapes. And at one point, Nixon goes, fuck the lira. Like they're going, Mr. President, this and that's happening. It's like, I don't care. Fuck the lira. And it was really funny because my economics professor at the time was an Italian guy, and he obviously found this very, very offensive. And we were just laughing. Like, who knew the Watergate tapes would come into sort of macro 101? So yeah, US like major currency fluctuations, which would it have affected Agatha Christie? I mean, a lot of her earnings were in dollars. I wonder if it was good or bad.
Love to
FedEx
know.
is founded. So Starbucks and FedEx. There
Yeah.
you go. Little Rock, Arkansas. June 71, we get the Pentagon Papers being published in the New York Times, which obviously starts to really turn the tide of public opinion against Vietnam. It already was, but the proof that successive governments had lied, that they'd known from the start that this was never going to work and that millions of men were going to die for basically an unwinnable war. Yeah. We also get racing drivers, Lennep and Helmut Marko, for all you Red Bull fans, winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the Martini Racing Porsche 917K. And we have, oh, this is good. In June of 1971, President Richard Nixon declares the US war on drugs. How's that all going? Has that resolved?
Yeah,
Where are we at with that?
they're winning it, but it's not quite won yet. So
Well, Trump's going to win it because he's going to put tariffs on people so that they stop the drugs coming in, like
oh, well,
Canada, those evil Canadians. So
well,
it's good.
yeah.
The war on drugs will end imminently, so that's good. With a victory, no less. July of 71. So furthermore, evidence of the hippie era ending. Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors, dies of heart failure at the age of just 27 in Paris. So you've got lost Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison. If you watch Austin Powers, there's a lot of sadness about these events.
Yeah.
Um, this is another one that totally freaks me out. July of that year, some dude called Michael S. Hart posted the first ever ebook.
Wow, that's incredible. I'd never realized that.
So it was a
So,
copy of the United States Declaration of Independence. He posted it on the University of Illinois' mainframe computer, and that's the origin of Project Gutenberg for all of you nerds out there who read free stuff on Project Gutenberg, as I have done. Yeah, that blew my mind. We also have the Gloria Steinem address to the women of America. So that wave of feminism is really taking the center stage now. And I guess that kind of speaks to Miss Marple moaning about, not Miss Marple, but women wearing trouser suits and burning their bras. Less happily, August 1971, much less happily, internment in Northern Ireland. So British security forces arresting hundreds of nationalists and detaining them without trial in Longkesh prison. If you want to know more about this, watch the phenomenal Steve McQueen film Hunger, about hunger strikes in effectively containment camps that Britain ran in Northern Ireland for a very long time. It's a shameful part of our history, but worth knowing about. And yeah, also Nixon formally just ends Bretton Woods system. So that is the end of the gold standard. Maybe it will come again. Who knows? We seem to be.
yeah, like my YouTube feed now, every second video is saying buy gold. Oh, it looks like it's on its way back.
Well, inflation is certainly on its way back.
Yeah.
September 71, John Lennon releases his studio album Imagine, which is going to become, well, certainly the title track, iconic at any rate. We have the opening of Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida in October. We also have the People's Republic of China being admitted to the United Nations and basically Taiwan being kicked out, which is still a state of circumstances that exist today. And nerdily, if you're an economist and you try and find like comparative data, you often don't find it on Taiwan because it doesn't submit to things like a lot of the UN sort of gathering of data and World Health Organization, that sort of stuff. So it's really, it actually makes my life harder. But I find that phenomenal that that's still the state of affairs. But I guess we've had an uneasy peace thus far, so it's worth it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And famously, the UK votes to join the European Economic Community. So, yes, which came to
Amazing.
and
You've skipped over some stuff that I'm very surprised at here.
really, I felt like I had so much, so I had to skip
Yeah.
over. What have I skipped over?
Arsenal do a League and Cup double.
Yeah, but I mean, I wasn't a Gooner then, so
Okay. Okay. Well, the other thing that struck me is the empire. So a number of countries became independent from Britain. So Bahrain and Qatar gained
Yeah.
independence. And East Pakistan became Bangladesh. So, like, again, we're seeing what would have been Agatha Christie's world as she was growing up, and, you know, it's gently slipping away.
Yeah.
The world has changed greatly. And then I suppose, like, we've touched on them, but I think both the Vietnam War and the troubles in Northern Ireland are, you know, at their peak. Like this, you know, they're both ramping up. And I think while I was like flicking through it, they were saying that this was the first time it was recorded that the majority of the American public were against America's engagement in a war.
Yeah, I think that's the Pentagon Papers, right? I think that really was a moment of radical cynicism and disbelief of being lied to, and just what is the point of all these overseas adventures and people coming back in body bags, right? But the point about Northern Ireland is a good one. I mean, October of this year is also when Ian Paisley founds the DUP in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
It's also when we get the post office tower bombing in London, which is quite famous. I mean, many bombings occurred over that period. But yeah, this is not a safe and happy time to be in these the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Northern Ireland. And I think it is interesting that the mood of this book, against all that volatility and uncertainty and violence, like domestic terrorism, whether underground, Northern Ireland, whatever, is one of twee country houses and solving kind of a historic murder in a way. And maybe it's safer and easier for Agatha Christie to do that than to really try and face it. Because after all, she did try and face the modern volatility in Passage to Frankfurt, and it was just like insanity, that book. So maybe she is better off just shying away from it a little bit.
Yeah. And the other thing, and this probably would have been massive competition in the Sunday Times bestseller list at the time for Agatha, Mr. Tickle was released, the first of the Mr. Men books.
Oh, you wouldn't have a Mr. Tickle now, would you? I mean, those were more innocent times. Right, let's get into this novel. So we have this coach tour, Miss Marple's on it, but she's really aging. She's really frail. She's trying to sort of investigate whatever this murder is. Let's get into this. She has been chosen by Jason Rafiel, who we know is quite a ruthless but effective businessman. And for those of us who love the All About Agatha podcast, this is a sad moment for us as listeners and fans of that, because this is when Catherine Broback, who was the co-host for the vast majority of this episode, very young, very unexpected illness, had passed away. So she's not on it. But Catherine was kind of famous, wasn't she, for creating her dark marple theory that Miss Marple, far from being fluffy, is actually quite a sinister character. And a lot of the characters here call her ruthless. So this, I think, if you believe in Dark Marple, this book is your thesis. Do you know, said Miss Marple to herself, it's extraordinary. I never thought about it before. I believe, I could be ruthless. The door opened and a dark curly head was popped in. It was Cherry, the welcome successor to Miss Bishop, Miss Knight. Did you say something? Said Cherry. I was speaking to myself, said Miss Marple. I just wondered if I could ever be ruthless. What, you? Said Cherry. Never. Your kindness itself. All the same, said Miss Marple. I believe I could be ruthless if there was a due cause. What would you call due cause? In the cause of justice, said Miss Marple. Yeah. Do you put much credence in the Dark Marple theory?
Yes, but maybe not to the same extent that Catherine on the All About Agatha podcast did. I don't see her as some dark Sith Lord, but I would see her as a ruthless character. But I think she's a reflection of Agatha herself in that respect. It's a much more black and white time. It's a lot less nuanced, and she does make that comment, doesn't she, about how a lot of understanding people's reasons for being bad is a load of twaddle because it's not their circumstances or their upbringing, they're just evil, and like you blink twice and think, okay, but it was a simpler time, wasn't it?
I mean, this is why Jason Rafiel,
much more black and white. People were judged much more black and white. You were seen as evil.
And maybe because it was a more believing Christian time, so the concept of evil as an absolute was something people believed in. I mean, Agatha Christie certainly did. And apparently Jason Rafiel has picked Miss Marple because he knows that she does too. So when Miss Marple's speaking to Professor Wanstead and wondering why Jason Rafiel picked her, she says, I have some natural curiosity, you know. I really can't think of any other advantage I conceivably could have. I'm slightly deaf. My eyesight is not quite as good as it used to be. I cannot really think that I have any advantages beyond the fact that I may, I suppose, seem rather foolish and simple, and am in fact what used to be called in rather earlier days an old dear. I am an old dear. Is that the sort of thing he said? No, said Professor Wanstead. What he said was he thought you had a very fine sense of evil. Miss Marple was quiet for quite a long time. At last she said, perhaps it is. Yes, perhaps. I have at several different times in my life been apprehensive, have recognized that there was evil in the neighborhood, the surroundings, that the environment of someone who was evil was near me, connected with what was happening. She looked at him suddenly and smiled. It's rather, you know, like being born with a very keen sense of smell. So we have Miss Marple as a sort of hound dog for evil. But, you know, Poirot, who you love, he says that sometimes, doesn't he? Like, I think on Death on the Nile, he says, you know, evil is abroad, or he says to
Yeah,
Jacqueline,
and
like, don't let evil in, it will make a home in your heart. You know, you won't get it out once it starts.
yeah, I think the way I would explain it, and I thought that was quite an interesting passage, you know, because
Mm,
she's basically saying I have an intuition for evil, and like yes, because of her vast life experience, she intuitively processes when she's in a situation where you know bad things are happening to people, you know,
mm,
and like that's life experience lends you that, you know, so I can see that in both Poirot and Marple.
mm,
You know, it's just the way that they almost casually dismiss the need to try and understand why somebody might have been evil. I'm not saying that they need to be forgiven, but like how do we fix things in the future? How do we stop these mistakes from happening again if we just put it on somebody else's toes to say, oh well, they were just born that way? You know,
yeah.
we're not learning anything from it. You know, but
Mm,
I thought that was quite interesting. Like I said, I would agree. I think Marple, she's got this supernatural ability to detect evil, but that comes from her experience, you know, her life
mm,
experience. So
agree. And then we have Jason Rafiel, who has already died, but it's still a presence. He's a fantastic character. I really like him. He's ruthless, financially savvy, enjoys losing his temper, not at all sentimental, but I think we're given to understand ultimately kind and quite a good sense of humour. This is the letter he writes her. Dear Miss Marple, by the time you read this, I shall be dead and also buried. Not cremated, I'm glad to think. It has always seemed to me unlikely that one would manage to rise up from one's handsome bronze vase full of ashes and haunt anyone if one wanted so to do. Whereas the idea of rising from one's grave and haunting anyone is quite possible. Shall I want to do that? Who knows? I might even want to communicate with you. Which I think is brilliant. Ethics. This feels like Agatha Christie's view, I've written in my notes. But what about Monty? Remember, Agatha Christie had in real life a younger brother who was quite
yes,
feckless, got in all sorts of trouble, and died young. And she writes lots of Monty characters who are redeemed by good women. See ending of this book. Christie believes in evil, but what do we do with the Monties of this world? So what we're going to discover is Jason Raphael has a son called Michael, and that son has always been a bit of a ne'er-do-well and a rogue and gotten into endless trouble that the dads had to bail him out from, very much like characters we've seen knitted all through Christie. But that in the final analysis, this poor chap Michael was accused of a murder, accused of murdering a woman that he was in love with, and so has been banged up. And what Jason Raphael wants to do in his dying wish is have Miss Marple reinvestigate that, and maybe see if the son is innocent. So that's actually going to be the nub of this. But let's see what is said here of Jason Raphael. And this is the solicitors. Yes, Miss Marple, you are using the right word. Jason Raphael was a ruthless man, but he was a just man and an honest man. He said, I've known what my son was like for many years. I have not tried to change him because I don't believe that anyone could change him. He is made a certain way. He is crooked. He's a bad lot. He'll always be in trouble. He's dishonest. Nobody, nothing could make him go straight. I'm well assured of that. I have, in a sense, washed my hands of him, though not legally or outwardly. He has always had money if he required it, help legal or otherwise if he gets into trouble. I have done always what I could do. Well, let us say, if I had a son who was disabled, who was sick, who was epileptic, I would do what I could for him. So how do you, I mean, we've had this with Agatha Christie before, right? Like she writes people off as being irredeemably a bad
mm,
lot. I don't know how that reads to modern eyes.
Well,
I mean,
I
maybe
mean,
it's frank and honest. I don't know, but
I mean,
pretty harsh.
what I would say is, I think like this is probably one of the weakest parts of this book, because it is so riddled full of contradictions.
Mm.
Because Agatha makes this point through the eyes of Marple that maybe the love of a good woman can fix people. We have this very rich man, who, by everybody's estimation, is incredibly clever and able, and he's turned around in the space of 2 sentences and said, "I always knew my son was evil, but I chose to give him as much money as he needed."
Yeah,
So
so
he
like
could just
you're
carry
enabling
on
it. Yeah.
being, yeah, exactly. So like, he had no sense of responsibility in trying to restrain his son. Money was no object in trying to get him defended, and get him acquitted. When he was presented in court, he never saw any sort of way of tempering his son's bad behavior. He just washed his hands of him. So like, I found it.
And you can absolve yourself of guilt. Like, you're not a bad
Yeah,
parent. It's not that you made mistakes in his upbringing. He was
no,
just beyond redemption,
yeah. So I think it's very weak on Agatha's part, and I think, again, like you said, probably a reflection of her very sort of absolute, Christian background, good and evil, and I think that's part of the problem. I mean, it's
And if
not so
she
much
really
as the
thinks these boys are so irredeemably evil, why does she always have them get married off to good girls who are going to reform them?
yeah,
Like, it's so
like
contradictory.
yeah, and I'm not saying that we need to try and, save evil people and understand them, and that they've always got reasons that they should be forgiven, or it's that deep. I'm just like, where are the people taking responsibility in this
Yes.
situation?
Yes,
To try and
exactly.
sort things out. So, but like, I think you can get hung up on this. This book is of its time.
Mm.
It has problems, but it's also got strengths. That we'll probably get to in the spoilers section.
We will
So.
do. We will do. We're getting there soon, actually. So, what is the crime Michael has been accused of committing? That he was in love with a girl called Verity Hunt, who'd been a pupil at the private school that the headmistress on the coach tour will have known. And that this is a description. Murder it was, barefaced murder, strangled and her head beaten to pulp. Miss Clotilde had to go and identify her. She's never been quite the same since. They found her body a good 30 miles from here in the scrub of a disused quarry, and it's believed that it wasn't the first murder he'd done. There had been other girls. 6 months she'd been missing, and the police searching far and wide. Oh, a wicked devil he was, a bad lot from the day he was born, or so it seems. So basically, no one's giving him the benefit of the doubt. And yet, Miss Marple does have to investigate this. And the people who she's going to see or who she's going to talk to include Miss Elizabeth Temple, the retired headmistress of the school that Verity attended. Any thoughts on her? She's quite an impressive figure, I thought.
Yes, yeah, I'd agree with you. She's an impressive figure. We don't really see a great deal of her, do we?
Mm,
She's in and out pretty quickly, because she also becomes a victim. Sorry,
yeah.
spoilers.
I
Oh,
think that's okay though. But I mean, like, she reminds me of the headmistress who's retiring in Cats Among the Pigeons. I
yeah,
think it feels like Agatha Christie has a great respect for that sort of very thoughtful, very kind, rather progressive sort of headmistress. So this is another one of those character types.
yeah.
The people she's going to have Professor Wanstead on her side as well to try and investigate. But along this coach tour, she is going to meet up with three sisters who also knew Michael Raphael and Verity Hunt. And she's going to actually come off the coach tour at some point and stay with them for a few nights in their house.
Mm,
And the three sisters, we can start with Lavinia Glynn, who's a widow, one of the three Bradbury Scott sisters who live along the tour route. The second is Clotilde Bradbury Scott, who still has her maiden name, so she was unmarried. Elder sister of Lavinia, quite bright, never got to go to university, but were given to understand that, very clever. She had taken an interest in Verity Hunt, treated her almost as a goddaughter, was pleased to give her lots of opportunities in life. This is a description. Clotilde, Miss Marple thought, was certainly no Ophelia, but she would have made a magnificent Clytemnestra. She could have stabbed a husband in his bath with exultation. But since she had never had a husband, that solution wouldn't do. Miss Marple could not see her murdering anyone else but a husband, and there had been no Agamemnon in this house. So if you know your Greek history or your Greek myths, then you'll know how to interpret that. And then
Almost
finally,
for pronunciation as well. Well done.
yeah. Yes, my education has not gone to waste. And then finally we have Anthea Bradbury Scott, who again is unmarried, the younger sister of Lavinia and Clotilde, a little bit sort of scatty. Kind of get the feeling that they're a little bit embarrassed of her and don't feel she can be left alone. And those are the three sisters that sort of Miss Marple spends time with, and they're kind of slightly mysterious and sinister. And there are other people. There's going to be an Archdeacon Brabazon, some local characters that come in, but those are the real characters. Any comments on any of those?
The only one I think I'd add to is Professor Wanstead, who,
Mm,
again, like the incredibly problematic character all the way through the book, but it is here to prove Michael Raphael's innocence because he has psychoanalyzed him as a thoroughly bad lot, but not capable of murder. The things that Michael Raphael, I don't think it's explicitly spelled out, but it's alluded to, that he has assaulted girls in the past.
yeah,
He's got a bit frisky with them. Like I'm not going to trivialize this, but like, so it sounds like he's been accused of sexual assault, and his dad's money's
yeah.
got him off, basically.
At the very
And
least,
and and here
yeah.
is this respected professor Wanstead who's decided, but he wouldn't be capable of murder. And I'm
You see,
like,
he reminds me of when we were watching the O.J. Simpson trial, and people were like, well, he beat his wife to shit and threatened to kill her, but he wasn't a murderer. That's very different, and
yeah,
I was like,
but this character is just completely at odds with other characters that Agatha has written previously.
yeah,
It's like she's written murderers who are people who've been caught in difficult situations, lovers and things like that, who've killed.
mm,
But Professor Wanstead, he's a complete bag of
horrific.
contradictions. He's one of the weakest parts of this book.
Completely
So
agree. And it's a weird thing, isn't it? Because like if we go now towards is the book progressive or regressive? I think we've touched on a lot of it. A lot of what's problematic does come from Professor Wanstead.
yeah,
And yet, in other respects, it's quite a sort of progressive novel. I mean, Miss Marple is very self aware about her vestigial racism. There's a moment where the novel reads Miss Marple had never quite succeeded in abandoning her Victorian view of foreigners, were never new with foreigners. Quite absurd, of course, to feel like that. She had many friends from various foreign countries. So I think there's something very touching and honest in that, right? So
mm,
you're still it's self-aware about bigotry and realizing it's stupid and you've got to move on. I've always thought that the whole concept that people can't reform is quite regressive.
it's incredibly hard because, like, the one thing about people is there are billions of us, and like very rarely will you find two the same.
Mm,
Like we're not cookie cutters. Each person is stamped, and like, yes, if we had unlimited time and unlimited resources, you could probably reform everybody, but
mm.
we don't. So
And also
it
free will. Like not everyone wants to be reformed, and kind of that's you've got to respect
exactly.
that in a way.
Yeah, there's a lot of
It's clockwork
complicated
orange
elements to
stuff,
it.
isn't it?
Yeah, but like the Professor Wanstead's approach, I'm not buying into that at all. Like the guy has committed a form of violent crime. So to turn
Yeah.
around and say to me that he is not a murderer, I can't. Like that's not the way it works. And like, there's-
But can you rape a sexually active girl? I say this obviously
right, well, here
being
we go.
ironic because there's a lot of really horrific. I mean, like some of the
Yeah,
stuff that really jumped out at me was the
yeah.
attitudes towards sexually active
Uh,
people. And
this
I
is like,
know this isn't how Agatha Christie feels because she herself was sexually active as a young woman and is sex positive, and yet you suddenly get this really dodgy stuff
yeah,
about who does
and
or
I
doesn't
think
have the right not to be raped, and you think,
you
bloody
know,
hell.
and I think like on the All About Agatha podcast, they were very severe on Agatha on this point, and I think I would give her the benefit of the doubt in that maybe these aren't her views, but I
Mm.
do definitely think that she was holding up a mirror to society's views at the time. These were commonly held, and like
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
not unusual. Like there's a conversation with the lawyers where they're talking about how girls trap boys and use rape. And I
Oh,
was
yeah.
like, this is like a complete Like, this is the problem the British legal system has, even to this day.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Like,
even to this day.
yeah, rape is one of the most under-prosecuted crimes in
So let's
the
let's
British
read
legal
some
system.
let's read out
Like,
some passages so people know what we're talking about, because this is some of the worst stuff about sex that I've read in Christie that's regressive. Most of the other stuff I've really hated and been upset about has been racist, but this stuff is just, it is unusual, and it's like some of me thinks, is it because she's in her 80s and she's becoming more
I think, like,
conservative?
if I'm going to be if I'm going to try and be constructive about this, I do think it's an important part of the book to read, because
Mm.
these are social attitudes that were prevalent in Britain in the 70s,
Yeah, this is a
and
best-selling book, and so
and
people were
and,
not reading this and going, "Oh my God, this is horrific," you know.
But the thing is, like, there's a bit where Christie is talking about this in a law office with two solicitors, and, like, I would stay, I'm not as close to this as I used to be, but I still think these are arguments that the solicitors put forward that are brought out in the British legal system
Oh, for sure.
in the current day. And if
Yeah.
people want to understand
It's
why
why
we
women
have
don't
such
come forward, right? Because they know
yeah,
that their whole sexual history is going to be dragged out in court. This
precisely.
this is the precise text, because I think we should read it into the record, so to say. From the solicitor, quote, "Well, we all know what rape is nowadays. Mum tells the girl she's got to accuse the young man of rape, even if the young man hasn't had much chance. With a girl at him all the time to come to the house while mum's away at work or dad's gone on holiday. Doesn't stop badgering him until she's forced him to sleep with her. Then, as I say, mum tells the girl to call it rape," end quote. So the girl was sexually avaricious, basically sexually harassed the guy into sleeping with her, and then calls rape. Here's another brilliant piece. Quote, "He had assaulted a girl. He had conceivably raped her, but he had not attempted to strangle her. And in my opinion, I've seen a great many cases which come before the assizes. It seemed to me highly unlikely that there was a very definite case of rape. The girl in question had had several boyfriends who had gone further," end quote. I mean, like, so because you've had consensual sex with someone, you can't be raped? That's evidence that you can't be raped? I mean, and then there's
But,
slut
like,
shaming. Plain
the
simple slut shaming as well.
yeah, but, like, people will get offended reading this, but, like, they need to take it on board that, like, this is
This is how
still the
people thought.
attitude in the British legal system. Like,
Yeah.
like, you do get rape trials collapsing because women can't give testimony because they know they're going to be cross-examined on
And
their
cool
previous
stuff.
sexual history.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been called up to jury duty. I've sat in cases like that, and it's
Mm,
happened.
yeah.
Not rape, but sexual
Sexual
assault.
assault. And this is
And
poor Nora, right?
yeah,
But I mean, it was something terrible the way she went on with all the boys. Anyone could pick her up. Real sad it is. I'd say she'll go on the streets in the end. So the idea that if you have consensual sex before marriage, you're one step away from being a prostitute. So you deserve either to become, you're going to become a sex worker, or you're going to get raped, and you deserve whatever you get. Right.
yeah.
I mean, it's just, this is some of the most horrific stuff on sex.
But
In general, Agatha is sex positive. This stuff
oh,
is just horrific.
I'm not saying these are her views. I'm saying
No, no.
these were socially
Norms.
normative views of the period. Like, this is
Completely
where this is
agree.
the useful document, and much to you know my disgust, I think we still have a problem with it in modern society
Completely
in
agree
the
with
legal
you.
system. So
Completely agree with you. Let's get into some reviews at the time. Matthew Cody in The Guardian of November 1971. Not a Christie classic, but the old hand is astonishingly fresh and the mixture is relaxing as a hot bath. Not sure I found it very relaxing at the end. Morris Richardson in The Observer, October 71. The showdown, when, and I'm not going to spoil it, is devilish fine. Not one of her best, perhaps, but remarkably inventive, quite worthy of the Picasso of the detective story. So, again, a reviewer saying it's the ending that really redeems this. Let's find something more contemporary from Robert Bernard. Miss Marple is sent on a tour of stately gardens by Mr. Rafiel. It's a very negative view of the novel. The garden paths we are led up are neither enticing nor profitable. All the usual strictures about late Christie apply. I think that's a bit unfair, but I can see why people would be down on this book. I tend to be like you, a bit more generous.
yeah, I think the people who are probably most down on this book aren't recognizing that they're expecting a cookie cutter
Yeah.
Agatha Christie mystery, and I don't think the strength of this book is in its mystery. I think the
Mm.
strength of this book is in the
psychology.
emotional ending, the reveal and the emotions that are brought out during that reveal. I mean, for me, it was almost as powerful as the sort of the ending of Five Little Pigs, where you're talking about people's raw emotion and love.
Yeah.
So
That's a really good comparison.
So I was quite moved,
I agree. It is
yeah.
moving, and I think it's meant to be.
Yeah,
It's a love
definitely.
story, isn't it? It's a love story gone
Yeah.
wrong. Have you seen any of the adaptations of this?
No, and I deliberately avoided them because I'd listened to the All About Agatha podcast first, and they were not kind either of them.
Okay,
So I avoided them.
I do know them. I do not love. Well, I certainly don't love the second one. So there's a 1987 Nemesis that was a two-part miniseries broadcast on the BBC, starring Joan Hickson. It deviates a lot from the novel, which is unusual for the Joan Hickson ones. They're normally quite faithful. There's lots of inventions. Miss Marple has a nephew who goes with her on the tour called Lionel Peel. Basically, they did them out of order. So Caribbean Mystery came after this, so they couldn't really have Jason Rafiel in it or in the same way. So yeah, it's of the Joan Hicksons, which generally I like because they are very faithful, and I quite like Joan Hickson because I think she does get that ruthlessness of Miss Marple. Of all the Miss Marples, she's the least jolly, which I think is right. This is not one that I would recommend. And then the 2007 ITV Nemesis stars Geraldine McEwen, who's very jolly and mischievous. And I love Geraldine McEwen. I just don't think it's right as Miss Marple. This was in the third series of the Agatha Christie's Marple series. This is a series that played fast and loose with adapting, and it just goes absolutely cockamamie. I mean, like it's nothing like the novel. So you can watch it if you want. I don't think even on its own terms it's particularly good. But funnily enough, we did watch this, my husband and I, and we realised the director is Nicholas Winding Refn, who made the sort of Danish sort of gangster trilogy, the Pusher trilogy, starring a very young Mads Mikkelsen. And it's just like, how did you get from basically like Nordic Tarantino to directing this? It's just wild.
Well, I don't know anything that you've just talked about. I don't have any points of reference, but from the little summary you've given me, I'm thinking Barton Fink. It's exactly that story.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there for now.
Well, just notable mention on
Yes.
the adaptations. I will be searching out and watching the Korean Miss Marples.
Ah.
So they got recommended on the All About Agatha podcast, and I think I have sourced them on Vicky Rakuten. So when I have time, I will be watching them. I'm quite
Well, let
looking
me know
forward
if
to
they're
that.
good. Let me know if they're any good, and I'll try and seek them out too. Okay, so that is the end of the spoiler-free part of this podcast. Join us next time for what will undoubtedly be a mini pod. It's Elephants Can Remember. And it's quite sad actually, because this is the Agatha Christie where I feel that you can start to see the dementia and the mental acuity decline, as well as Posthumous Fate. So that will be short and rather sad. And then we'll get into a triumphant finale with the final two, Curtain and Sleeping Murder, which were, of course, written in the 1940s. So we are coming to the final chapters of this. Thank you so much for joining, Pat, and thank you so much for listening, listeners. Join us after the end credits music for all the spoiler-filled clues and discussion. Okay, folks, so we're back with the solution to Nemesis and the clues. And very early on, Miss Marple hints that Mrs. Bartlett and Miss Hastings, newly moved into St. Mary Mead, may be in a Boston marriage. So that gives you a hint to look out for lesbian couples. There is a mention in the body in the library as a memory of Miss Cook changing her hair colour. Should also make us remember the identity of the body had been disguised by bashing in the face. So I think whenever you get a body in an Agatha Christie where the face has been disfigured, you should question whether that was really the identity of the person murdered and whether there's not been a switcheroo. I think a big clue is that passage I read about Clotilde being described as Clytemnestra. And then Agatha Christie sort of quickly dismisses it because she said, well, there was no husband, so she didn't murder her husband. But I think that if you think about, well, who did Clotilde love? Who was she in a partnership with? A sexual part? Well, maybe not an actual sexual partnership, but a sexually avaricious partnership with. Then you can figure out the murder. So the solution is that Verity Hunt came to the three sisters. That Clotilde formed a very passionate attachment toward her. I think there's a hint in those passages about sort of passions at boarding school that maybe Verity returned it a little bit, but not really. That ultimately Verity wanted to have a heterosexual lover, which turned out to be Michael Raphael.
Yeah, and like
And what, yeah.
I think that bit you can read as little or as much into it. I think like she's very ambiguous there. I think she gives you as much rope as you want to take in
Yeah,
that, because
exactly.
I never picked up on that depth of relationship. I know that some interpretations have taken it. They talk a great deal about this on the All About Agatha podcast about, is it a lesbian relationship? And I figure you just take it away. But there was a very close attachment between the two of them.
I think it was very
And
obsessive. It doesn't have to be
yes,
sexually sort of
precisely.
consummated. I think, and it may not have even really been on Verity's part. She just may have been very, as a young orphan, may have
Yeah.
been very glad to have some attention and some friendship as a very
Yeah. But
lonely young girl. But I think
Clotilde
on
has formed that.
Clotilde's point, it is an
Yeah.
obsessive relationship and it's love. I think
Yeah.
it is a kind of twisted, weird, obsessive love.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that rather than lose Verity to a man, well, not to a man, but just
And
to a
not just,
rival, I think it could have
not
been to
just any
another
man
woman,
as well. Such a I think she actually says this,
a
such an
rotter.
undeserving man,
Yeah, a
in her
rotter,
opinion. Yeah.
an absolute rotter. So she actually kills Verity Hunt, buries her in the garden, so she's close to her forever in the old greenhouse, and lets a very conveniently fast-growing creeper grow up, so that it's a very sort of like obvious mound of creeper over
Yeah.
decrepit conservatory, effectively. And whenever
Yeah.
the little sister Anthea's like, "Oh, can't we sort of clean this up and spend some money on it and grow some muscat grapes as we used to do?" Clotilde gets really angry. That's another clue. She absolutely loses it when
Yeah.
Anthea gets people in to do a quote on the rebuilding. But the tragedy of Clotilde is that she is condemned to live with the dead body of the woman that she loves so close by and just
Well,
always haunting her.
I think Marple talks about, she's effectively created a shrine
Mm,
in this, in this mausoleum that she's created in her back garden. She
mm,
very intentionally done so.
yeah.
That's part of this obsessive jealousy,
Mm.
that she has, and this obsessive love.
And
So
there is a suggestion that Anthea, the little sister who everyone thinks is Scatty, probably has figured some of this out.
yes, yeah,
And that's
I think
part of
so.
why she has become even more fragile.
Do think there is quite an interesting passage as well, where Marple is comparing the three sisters to the witches from Macbeth as well.
Mm,
And I think again, like that's giving us a clue. And I just loved the way they were saying that when it was portrayed on stage, they were always shown as caricatures, extremes, crones with funny, raspy voices. And Marple was saying, I actually find it far more scary if they would just be normal, ordinary people,
mm.
just played straight. And I just thought, that's Bob on the money. Those are the scariest types of situations. And I thought like that's essentially what we've got here. Three seemingly normal people, you know, three sisters living together, because of family circumstances and the money's disappearing, and they're
It's
living
very
on what.
claustrophobic and
Yeah.
very, yeah, it's horrid,
So
isn't it?
yeah.
Very sinister and very well written for tone. I feel the tone of this claustrophobic, slightly fragile, fraying at the edges environment, I think is very well done.
Yeah, I
I
think
have a
that's a good observation,
question.
that. Yeah.
Do you think Clotilde is a predatory groomer? Well, there's many as was kind to her. There was the people at the old manor house, Mrs. Glynn wasn't there then, but Miss Clotilde, she was always one to be good to the girls from school. Yes, many a nice present she's given Nora. She gave her a very nice scarf and a pretty dress once. Very nice it was. A summer frock, a sort of foulard silk. Ah, she was very kind, Miss Clotilde was. Tried to make Nora take more interest in her schooling. Lots of things like that. So it
Um,
feels like Clotilde, and this little girl Verity is not the first one that Clotilde's had a
well,
relationship with. And
I
let's
think
let's resolve Nora. Nora was the person that people were describing as, too promiscuous. She is the body that's found with the face bashed in. So basically, not only has Clotilde murdered Verity, she's also murdered this other girl and used her body to be a stand-in for Verity so that she can keep the real dead Verity in her hothouse,
Yeah.
basically.
I think you can read that into it. I didn't, because the way that I read that situation is Clotilde realized that she needed a body
Mm.
to cover for Verity, and she identified Nora because she didn't think Nora had any value as a human being.
Yeah, but when she's a schoolgirl buying her dresses and stuff and trying to influence the
Yeah.
queen, it's a bit.
Yeah, no, like I'm saying, I think you can read that into it. I think there's definitely enough evidence there to support that. But I'd not picked up on that. I thought, well, like what horrified me was the way that she'd identified that she needed somebody to cover for
Yeah.
Verity. So Nora was going to be that victim, and everybody wouldn't be worried about Nora because she was seen as
They
having very little
expected her to
social.
get, yeah, they expected her to get abducted or raped at
Yeah,
some point, right? It would have been very expected.
or be on the streets in another city.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think there is an element of grooming to that. But yeah, as you say, that's what I love about this book. It's quite slippery. It's quite
Yes.
slippery. She gives you enough to work with if you want to, but it's quite cleverly done.
Yeah.
Lots of repetition in this book. Love triangles always feature in Agatha Christie, don't they? Death on the Nile, lots of them. Except this is a love triangle between two women and a man with rather than two women fighting over a man.
Yeah.
It's a man and a woman fighting over a woman. So that
Yeah.
makes it a little bit more interesting. There are boulders that move, just as in Death on the Nile. The boulder that falls on the headmistress is a little bit like the boulder that
Successfully,
falls, yeah, successfully in this
successfully
case.
this time.
Yeah, but very much something repeated. Saving a bad young man through a good marriage. We've had that a lot, and I find that very objectionable, but we get that here. Um, there's a lot that's similar to By the Pricking of Thumbs, and I wonder if they were written at the same time. So in Pricking of My Thumbs, we get a shambolic rundown house. We get Macbeth's three weird witches illusions. We get past crimes of girls being abducted or going missing. We get, promiscuous girls getting knocked up. We get a female investigator in a village trying to uncover a past murder. We get the murderer attempting to shut them up with poisoned milk. We get the killer then drinking the milk when busted. It's very similar, these two books. Very, very similar indeed. So a lot of repetition there. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about was like the depiction, or as well as obviously like the repetition of the body in the library switcheroo. The other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was if you think there is lesbianism in her, how it's depicted and how we feel about that. There's a really good book by someone called Gillian Gill that I've been reading as I go through some of these novels. She doesn't refer to all of them, but I find her very thoughtful. So I want to read you this. The Verity Hunt Clotilde Bradbury Scott relationship offers no insights into lesbianism, but it allows us to see with peculiar clarity how strange and unconventional were Agatha Christie's views on sexual relations between men and women. Fiercely convinced as she was of a woman's sexual nature and of her imperative need for and right to full sexual experience, Agatha Christie seems not to even entertain the possibility that a lesbian relationship might allow an equal or even possibly superior sexual fulfillment. An Agatha Christie woman is a woman who has to have a man, who finds irresistible the charm, the looks, the company, and by implication, the pleasure men can afford, and for whom the moral worth, social standing, and financial position of the target male are largely irrelevant. As Miss Marple freely acknowledges, Michael Raphael has never been any good and probably never will be. Even Michael's strongest defenders, his father Jason, psychologist Professor Wanstead, and Archdeacon Brabazon, see little real possibility that Michael will be reformed by his love for Verity Hunt or hers for him. Yet, despite all these shortcomings that Agatha Christie seems to delight in emphasizing, Michael is the man for the young, beautiful, innocent, and good Verity Hunt. His handsome looks and his charm have engaged her capacity for love, and he can offer her sexual fulfillment and children should she want them. In the strange Christian worldview, marriage between Verity and Michael even receives the blessing of the church, as expressed by benevolent patriarch Archdeacon Brabazon. Only Clotilde, a noble, intelligent, impressive woman who loves Verity more than anything in the world, including herself, and whom Verity has loved because she has proved worthy of love, cannot accept the logic of Verity's natural preference of Michael to herself. The tall, handsome, compelling Clotilde is a brilliant woman whose longing to go to university was frustrated by family demands. As a scholarly spinster, Clotilde forms a sisterly trio with two other women deeply involved in young women's lives, whom Christie introduces into her novel, Elizabeth Temple and Emily Waldron. So then she goes on about teachers and what that. What do you think about that? This idea that Christie was very sex positive, but that fundamentally, even though she does have lesbian characters in her books and quite fulfilled lesbian characters, even the worst of men is better than a woman.
You advocate quite strongly for Gillian Gill, and every time you give one of her quotes out when
You
we're
don't
doing
buy it.
this, no, I do. I'm
Oh,
always,
okay.
I take a step back and go, she's right, but I'm a man, and my view is limited, and I'd never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
She's given an insight into this that she's brought a perspective to it I never had. Like you've blindsided me with this. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I'm guilty as charged here for being, you know, unknowing misogynist because I've not even thought about this
Well, I
aspect
don't
of
think
it.
you're an unknown misogynist. I think it's just that Gillian Gill is such a clever literary theorist that she finds
No,
things that
but
we've covered many times.
she's nailed it because like for me the real strength here and like I'd not thought about how if you were a lesbian and you were reading this book how you would feel offended by the way Clotilde is portrayed and
Mm.
like it's an accurate it's on the money that criticism because for me like I felt very sad at the end of this when I'd read it. Sad for Clotilde, because although she is a psychotic murderer, she is obviously loved very, very deeply. It might
Yeah.
be a twisted,
She's a
broken,
she's a tragic victim
nasty
of
love,
this love
but
as much as anyone else. Yeah.
she is a tragic character.
And in the same way, I would feel, sad and tragic about Jacqueline de Belfort. I think these lovers whose love becomes so extreme and so obsessive that it leads them to murder, I do find very sad. And I'm
Yeah.
so torn, Pat, between because on the one hand, I'm like, well, we've had so many love triangles in Agatha Christie. Actually, it's quite modern and progressive to say, why could it not be a lesbian love triangle rather than a heterosexual one? And why would a woman not have, if a woman can go crazy obsessive with love like Jacqueline and become a murderess, why not over a woman as much as over a man? In a way that feels very kind of equal. Like, sometimes we say when we watch modern TV and film that actually the true equality is not to shy away from making a black person the baddie or a gay person the baddie, because true equality is it's about their individual characteristics, not their identity. So
Mm.
part of me thinks this is amazing for an 81-year-old woman to say, actually, this love triangle doesn't have to be heterosexual. This can work in a different way.
It's
And on
just
the
it's a
other,
shame it's the first time she's grasped a nettle and just picked
yeah. And then
the
it's like, on
character
the other
that's
hand,
done
it's like, if you were a lesbian reading this, and this is the first time you really get like a psychological portrait, other than the amazing, what's the other Miss Marple, where there's a really tragic, there's a lesbian couple who clearly are in love with each other, and one of them gets murdered, and then you see the grief of the other, and that's just
Yeah,
heartbreaking.
I know that what you're talking about. I've forgotten it.
Oh, is it the
The name of
moving
it.
finger or is it
No,
no, is it the first one, the murder at the vicarage? Anyway, there is a great Miss Marple lesbian love story that's
yeah,
actually heartbreaking. But you do fall a little bit into that trope, don't you, that wherever there's a gay couple, it's got to end unhappily.
Clotilde has many admirable traits.
Mm.
She's intelligent, she's articulate,
Yeah.
she's educated, she's had to sacrifice herself for the good of her family,
Yeah.
in ways that other people haven't, and she has done it. And okay, we could read into it as predatory grooming, but if you were to be very, very generous, you could say she is
Kindness,
actually like,
philanthropy,
trying to promote girls' education.
and give some women the chances that she never had.
Exactly. And yet she's turned out to be quite a vicious murderer.
She's
So like
saying to
I think it's a
Laura,
fair,
make something of yourself, try and take your education seriously. I mean, she does end up murdering her, but
yeah,
in a
it's a
sense
fair
that
criticism.
I
So
think she's heartbreaking. I really do. I think Clotilde, that's the reason why I do like Nemesis, the book. I know it's baggy. I know it's got problems. I know it's got
yeah,
problematic characters. I find that the writing that Agatha Christie puts in at the end is so slippery and so brilliant at an evoking tone and so heartbreaking. She's still got it. And I find that some of these issues, I don't know what the answer is, but I love debating them and thinking them and coming back to them. And I just think a woman in her, 60 plus books, 'cause she's done short stories and other novels that we've not covered. And in her early 80s is writing something that's still in 2025, I'm puzzling over and trying to figure out. It's flipping amazing.
what I'm amazed about is why there's only been two poor adaptations, because it strikes me that the material is here.
Yeah, someone should do a really good one, right?
There's great material here to do a fantastic drama.
And cut away a lot of the sort of extraneous characters and a lot of the bunkum and just get into the psychology and really go for it.
Yeah, reshape it for the 21st century. And like, I loved that bed scene at the end. And like, I'm like,
so good.
Like, and like one of the few times I would agree with almost all the male characters in this book, because I had disagreements with like all of them all of the time. But at the end, where they're saying, can't get over the brass neck of Marple confronting the murderer as she's sitting in her bed, completely, up for taking on the with
no real idea she's got bodyguards hidden in the cupboard or whatever.
Yeah, like she's sitting in her bed talking to this woman who's bigger and stronger than her, facing her down.
Yeah, exactly. She is ruthless, and she does have power, and there's a real courage and a real Nemesis is the perfect word. She is like this avenging angel of justice who's going to come in and, oh, bloody hell, Newcastle have scored. Fuck me.
We were supposed to be finished by now, Bina.
We were. It's probably better off that we're not, because I mean, is this really a match? Oh, I just can't cope. The heartbreak. I'm really pleased that you jumped on this and we did this as a full pod, because it's reminded me just how much I know this is a flawed novel, but what I love about it, I really do love. And it's just, it's gladdening to know that Agatha still had it in some respect. So
I think she's created the bones of a fantastic story are there, and she's got some great little scenes in it. And like I said, tragically heartbreaking. Like I said, I think maybe Five Little Pigs. Like for me, it's a better book, probably the best. I think, if I'm being honest, about all the ones that I've read as part of this reread. But that scene at the end where you're discovering how much Clotilde, even though it was a warped love, loved Verity and what it drove her to, out of her jealousy, and it's eye-opening, really. So
completely agree. Is Five Little Pigs the one that All About Agatha had top at the end?
I think so.
I don't hate that. I really don't hate that. And I find that, that's the difference between Agatha Christie in the 40s or the 30s when Five Little Pigs was written and Agatha Christie in 1971. Like, she can still get to that peak. Yeah. It's just that at the height of her powers, the whole book was at that peak.
Yeah.
But it is amazing. Like, she remains that writer. So even with her old age, like, she can still get there. It's just sustaining it.
Yeah. Well, like, I don't know. I find it like difficult to sort of square this circle in my own head, because I came away from this book being glad I'd read it, even though the first half of it is interminable. It is so long,
rambly, and
but I took more out of it. I think maybe because I feel like I'm getting a sort of an insight into the tragedy of human love. Whereas I got nothing from Then There Were None. It's just too dark and nihilistic, all
it's
the way through
too cynical. It's too much about the plotting.
But like if I'm being honest with myself, I still love the frivolity of the earlier ones. The Death on the Nile,
I love Death on the Nile.
Side hustles and stuff. That's my favorite, but I think Five Little Pigs is probably her best written book for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, if I were doing like a top 5 and being very rational, I would have like Five Little Pigs, Crooked House, books like that at the very top.
Yeah.
But the one that's closest to my heart, the one that I go back and reread the most and watch the most, and that I can probably, if you gave me any sentence, I can probably carry on, is Death on the Nile.
Yeah.
I know that there are, quote unquote better books, and actually books that move me, like Five Little Pigs. I think it's very moving. I think this is very moving, but somehow Death on the Nile has that perfect balance
it's
of ingenious plot, brilliant characters, and a very tragic love story. And to me, the tragedy of that love story is that Jacqueline loves, like Clotilde.
Yeah.
But here, at least the object of Clotilde's affection is worth it, right? Because Verity Hunt is a very good and wonderful person. we're led to believe.
Hmm.
But the object of Jacqueline's affection, Simon Doyle, is just some like, feckless Monty figure who's not particularly charming and a bit of a petty thief. And it just feels, gosh, all that passion and fire and smarts Jacqueline wasted on this twat. And even Lynette Doyle is quite an impressive businesswoman, and I just feel these two women are wasted on this fool. So
Yeah.
it's kind of, to me, it's even more tragic in some ways because it wasn't. You get the feeling that with Clotilde and Verity, whether or not there was anything sexual to it, there was a genuine affection on both sides.
Yes.
Obviously, it was far greater on Clotilde's and Verity's, and became unbalanced. But actually, there was a genuine friendship and a genuine mentorship there, and something that was very pure and lovely before it went wrong.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
think as well, like that was part of the tragedy for it as
Mm.
well. I'm going to borrow from a film called Mean Girls, and I got the feeling uh, this was a Winnie the Pooh moment because like, well, like there's a tragedy to Winnie the Pooh because he gets abandoned when Christopher Robin grows up. They
Yeah,
are bosom because Verity and Clotilde were obviously when Clotilde was a teenager were
they were bosom buddies.
emotionally connected,
Yeah.
and it probably intellectually connected.
Mm.
But Verity has grown up, and okay, Agatha's wrapped it rather poorly in her need for a man. But
Mm.
she as she's become an adult, she's moved on,
Yeah.
and like Clotilde is now superfluous, and she doesn't like that,
Yeah.
It makes her angry, and that's why she commits the murder, in the end, because she has been passed over. It's very sad that,
I
but
agree. I agree. And the Winnie the Pooh analogy is a good one. I suppose
so
if we wanted to be a bit more highfalutin, we'd say maybe Prince Hal and Falstaff in
yes,
Shakespeare.
yes, yes. Thankfully, you're here to rescue us, Bina.
I do love
So,
Pooh Bear. I feel I'm increasingly becoming Pooh Bear in my old age. I just like honey and comforts of home. I think there's nothing wrong with that. My shape is starting to become increasingly like Winnie the Pooh after Christmas as well.
well, everybody says we've all indulged too much. So
Thank you. That was a great discussion. Now I know why All About Agatha did like a 10-hour podcast episode on this
I
because
couldn't believe it how long it was. It was
it's
like
a
three
book that
hours long.
draws you in. We were planning to do this in a crisp 45 minutes before the Arsenal match, and we've gone an hour and 44 unedited.
Yeah,
So
well,
there's something to this book that it's drawn us in, isn't there?
well, that and the fact that 1971 had probably more going on it than any other previous year since
That's
Agatha
great.
started writing.
Yeah. X the Warriors,
Yeah,
to
there's
be
so
fair.
much
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. I suppose we will reconnect on Curtain, which is epic. I am debating whether to go back and read Styles, like Mysterious Rare Styles, before Curtain, but we've got a few before then. But the final, well, actually, it's not the final Poirot, but the best of the late Poirots, because it's not really a late Poirot, we have yet to come.
But
Um,
you were in the home straight now.
I feel I'm in the home straight.
You've done really well.
There's like a
So
desperation that gets me at the end of these. I remember when we were doing the linear reread of A Song of Ice and Fire, and when I got into the sort of like the kind of the high 90s, and I could see the end was coming at like episode 104, whatever, getting almost like hysterically manic about I've got to somehow see this through. I wonder how marathon runners, if that's how they feel when they get to sort of mile 25.
yeah, when they've hit the wall,
Yeah,
so
I feel I
you've
was
got
at the wall for a while, and that
the
would
last
break into
mile to
spirit.
do. So
Exactly. All right, then. Have a wonderful rest of the evening. Thank you
and
for
you.
listening, listeners. We'll be back with a mini pod for Elephants Can Remember in due course, and speak to you all soon. Bye,
Okay,
everyone.
bye.
Bye.